I am joined by Lieutenant Colonel Daniel L. Davis. He's a senior fellow at Defense Priorities and joins me from Washington. And as you are in the United States, I will call you Lieutenant. Thank you so much. Glad you could be with us.
Thanks for having me.
As you listened to the two leaders this morning, what went through your mind? How do you think that was going?
Well, I certainly think that, your prime minister is certainly right that Canada has been there by the United States, and probably, I think you could argue as much as any member of NATO has ever been throughout the period of time. I actually remember personally serving with Canadian soldiers in Afghanistan during that NATO deployment there. So I've seen firsthand just how it works, and I agree with that.
And what did you make of the fact that when asked, the president sounded like he was contemplating a penalty for countries that didn't pay their fair share? He was asked whether or not he would defend them if they paid less than 1%. And he was kind of musing out loud that there may be a price to pay for that, so to speak.
Well, and that's one of the characteristics about the entire Trump presidency since the beginning. He's been a very disruptive figure, and he's been willing to do things that none of his predecessors have been doing. And, all the presidents, I think all the way back through, have always, periodically said something about that NATO members, especially European members, are not paying their fair share and they need to do more. But there's never been any penalty. There's never been any consequence to it. And as a result, perhaps not surprisingly, most of the European countries have continued to pay very small amounts, knowing that the United States is going to be backstopping them no matter what. But the conditions that led to NATO's formation in 1949 are dramatically different than they are today. And I think President Trump is getting a little bit more willing to challenge the status quo on that and say, hey, look, if we're going to continue to have this, it's going to have to be a more balanced to reflect the current geostrategic conditions that exist right now, 70 years later. And if he comes to the conclusion that, the Europe is not going to do what they say they're going to do, what they've agreed to do, then it's not at all unconceivable that he may say, you know what, we're going to take some actual actions here and maybe scale back American participation as opposed to just say we're not going to defend them. But there probably needs to be some teeth if the comments are actually going to be accurate.
Okay, and at the same time, you've got now tension between Trump and Macron, because Macron said that NATO was brain dead, which was indirectly or directly related or directed towards President Trump for pulling soldiers out of northern Syria. Now we have Trump saying, well, you shouldn't speak so poorly, so negatively of NATO. How do you see Trump and Macron, which they used to have a bromance, now getting back on track?
Right. Yeah, that's definitely the case. I was watching that press conference this morning when it was live, and it was pretty stark. Mm-hmm. Trump was using some pretty direct and undiplomatic language, if you will, but that reflects the current state of things in NATO. And it's not just with President Trump and Macron, because you also have between Macron and Erdogan, and also some of the German officials that are also making some waves, because it seems like that people are starting to go more and more in their own direction, look more and more toward their own interest. And that's increasingly diverging from a unified NATO view. And I think that's something that you're probably going to see continuing.
Do you think it's time that there was a revamp of NATO? Do you think NATO is still relevant?
Without question, it must be revamped. It has to be relooked, because the conditions that led to NATO, as I said a minute ago, are very dramatically different than they were. In 1949, Europe was very weak. Their economies were shattered from the Second World War, and the menace from the East was real and large and overwhelming, that it was an existential threat both to Western Europe and to the United States' interests. That is no longer the case. Now the European nations are very strong. Their economies are comparatively much stronger than Russia's. Russia itself is only a mere shell of this former Soviet Union, and even if they may desire to do more aggressive things, they don't have the physical capacity to do so or to maintain it. And so I think it's important to say, hey, we need to relook these, how NATO is formed, how NATO functions, and how it's actually provided for in terms of financial resources. Those things need to come into reality with what exists right now.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel L. Davis, appreciate your time with us this morning.
My pleasure.